My name is Vivian. I am 62 years old, and my occupation is a retired high school principal. I traded my own future and physical well-being to ensure my son had every advantage in this world. I sacrificed everything only for his entitled wife to convince him to throw me out on the street like a piece of garbage. He coldly cut me out of his life standing by as I was told to pack my bags, completely oblivious to the devastating secret I had carried in my own body for decades, just to protect him. He truly believed he owed me absolutely nothing. But that was before he saw the medical records that would shatter his entire reality. I spent 35 years of my life molding other people's children into respectful, capable adults. I taught them empathy, responsibility, and the value of family. Yet in the cruelest twist of fate, the one child I poured my absolute soul into became the very thing I warned my students against. It all came to a breaking point on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking my coffee when my son Marcus walked into the room. He is 34 years old, a grown man, but he looked like a coward as he stood there with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He refused to even look me in the eye. He just stared at the floor while his wife Chloe marched in right behind him. Chloe had a cold, arrogant smirk on her face that I will never forget. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she tossed a thin stack of legal papers onto the table right next to my mug. It was a formal eviction notice. She then dropped a roll of black, heavy-duty trash bags on the rug and told me I had exactly 1 hour to pack up whatever could fit inside them. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to stop, her waiting for the boy I raised to defend his mother. He just stood there in absolute silence. They looked at me like I was nothing but a useless burden taking up space in their pristine house. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who would just quietly fade away. They had no idea about the explosive truth I was holding on to, and they certainly did not know what I was about to do next. I did not raise Marcus with a silver spoon in his mouth, but I made absolutely sure he never tasted the dirt. Every single day was a battle of survival, a relentless push to keep our heads above water. Being a single mother is a heavy cross to bear, and raising a black boy in America meant I had to be his shield, his guide, and his ultimate provider. His father passed away when Marcus was barely out of diapers, leaving us with nothing but a mountain of medical bills and a desperately empty house. I was a young teacher back then, working my way up the educational ladder. But a teacher's starting salary was barely enough to keep the lights on and keep fresh food in the fridge. We lived in a neighborhood where temptation and trouble waited on every street corner. I knew the statistics, and I saw the harsh realities in my own classrooms every single day, so I built a fortress around him with my own bare hands. I refused to let my son slip through the cracks or fall in with the wrong crowds. I worked double shifts, taking on every extra tutoring job, summer school session, and administrative task I could possibly find. I would wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare lesson plans, get Marcus ready for schoolwork all day, and then come home to grade papers until midnight. I did not buy new clothes for myself for almost 10 years. My winter coat was frayed at the cuffs, and my shoes were worn completely flat. But Marcus always had exactly what he needed. When Marcus showed an interest in academics and sports, I swallowed my pride and cleaned houses on the weekends to pay for his private tutors, his baseball uniforms, and those exorbitant travel team fees. I spent my Saturdays sitting in the bleachers, cheering until my voice gave out, while secretly calculating how many more houses I needed to scrub to afford his advanced test prep courses. I wanted him to have every single opportunity that the two-parent households had. My feet would ache so badly by the end of the day that I could barely stand, but seeing him bring home straight A's and hearing the crack of his baseball bat made every ounce of pain worth it. I drove my body into the ground to ensure he could walk tall, unburdened by the financial struggles that kept me awake at night. I wanted him to look at his future and see open doors, not the walls of our cramped apartment. That grueling sacrifice paid off when he earned a full academic scholarship to a top university. I wept with immense pride on his graduation day, truly believing I had done my job well. But the truth is, the financial struggle was the absolute easiest part of raising him. The real sacrifice, the one I buried deep inside my own flesh, began when Marcus was just 7 years old. He came down with a sudden fever that would not break, and his skin took on a terrifying ashen hue. I took him to the emergency room thinking it was a severe childhood virus, but the doctors delivered a living nightmare. I can still remember the stark white walls of that hospital room and the cold clinical tone of the specialist as he broke the news. My little boy was in severe rapid kidney failure. His tiny body was shutting down right in front of my eyes, and the agonizing waitlist for a pediatric donor was a literal death sentence. The doctors told me we had weeks, maybe days. There was not a single second of hesitation in my mind. I demanded they test me immediately, and by the grace of God, I was a perfect match. I gave my son my kidney to save his life. The transplant was a miraculous success for Marcus, but my own body never fully recovered from the massive trauma of the surgery. The doctors had warned me there were risks, but I did not care. However, the harsh reality of living with one functioning kidney and a compromised system hit me with a vengeance. I developed lifelong debilitating complications. I suffered from severe chronic fatigue, agonizing nerve damage, and early onset high blood pressure that required a daily handful of incredibly expensive medications. The mounting medical bills from my own faltering health and continuous treatments plunged me into a massive pit of debt that took me 2 entire decades to climb out of. But I made a solemn, unbreakable vow to myself in that hospital room. I swore that Marcus would never know the true price I paid. I never wanted him to look at me and feel the suffocating burden of guilt. I hid my physical agony behind a bright, encouraging smile. I took my pain pills in total secret. I skipped my own doctor appointments when money was tight, so he could go to summer camp and focus on just being a normal kid. I smiled through the exhaustion when I attended his college tours, silently ignoring the throbbing pain in my abdomen. I sacrificed my long-term health, my retirement savings, and my physical comfort entirely for him. I absorbed all the pain so he could live a completely perfect, carefree life. I gave him my future so he could have one of his own. And now the very boy breathing with my kidney inside of his body, the man whose life I literally saved with my own organs, had just handed me a trash bag and told me to get out of his house. Things changed the moment Marcus met Chloe. She was a woman utterly consumed by outward appearances, designer labels, and social status. From the very beginning, I could see the cold, calculating ambition in her eyes, but Marcus was completely blinded by her polished facade. He gave her the lavish wedding she demanded, completely funding it himself. Soon after they married, the fragile balance of my own health finally shattered. My one remaining kidney, overworked and strained for nearly 30 years, began to rapidly decline. The doctors told me I could no longer live alone. I needed daily assistance. Marcus insisted I move into their sprawling house, taking the guest room down the hall. I was so grateful at first, thinking my son was stepping up to care for the mother who had given him everything. But the moment I moved my bags across that threshold, the environment became incredibly toxic. Chloe treated my illness not as a tragedy, but as a personal inconvenience to her immaculate lifestyle. She constantly complained about my dietary needs, the smell of my medications, and the slow pace of my walking. If my friends from the school district called, she would hang up the phone or tell them I was too confused to speak. She isolated me in that room, making me feel like a stubborn stain on her perfectly curated life. Every cough, every sigh, every moment of weakness was met with an exaggerated eye roll or a cruel remark under her breath. Marcus was always working, always busy, leaving me completely at her mercy. I tried to stay out of her way, shrinking myself down to keep the peace for my son. But the hostility in that house was suffocating me faster than my failing body ever could. The true depth of Chloe's malice revealed itself on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She thought I was at the dialysis clinic, but my appointment had been cancelled due to a transportation mix-up, so I was resting quietly in my room. The house was completely silent until the front door clicked open. I heard Chloe's sharp heels clicking on the hardwood floors, accompanied by the heavy footsteps of her brother Trey. Trey was a slick, fast-talking man who always seemed to be floating between mysterious business ventures. I cracked my bedroom door open just an inch, intending to let them know I was home, but the words leaving Chloe's mouth froze me dead in my tracks. She was pouring them drinks in the kitchen and laughing a loud, piercing laugh. She told Trey that she could not take another single week of playing nurse to a broken-down old woman. Trey chuckled and mocked my slow walk, imitating the way I held the handrails when I went down the stairs. It was sickening. Then Chloe's voice dropped into a low, vicious register. She told Trey that the plan was already in motion. She was going to have me declared legally incompetent. She bragged about how easy it was going to be to convince a judge that my mind was failing along with my body. She said she had found a bottom-tier state-run nursing facility 2 towns over the kind of miserable, understaffed place where elderly people are just left in dark rooms and forgotten. She actually smiled when she said I would not last 6 months in a place like that. I pressed my hand hard against my mouth to muffle my own gasps, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She was not just trying to get me out of the house. She was actively plotting to strip away my basic human rights, lock me away in a dismal institution, and erase me from society completely. She spoke about my life as if disposing of me was just another annoying chore on her weekend to-do list, no different than taking out the recycling. And the absolute worst part was hearing Trey congratulate her on being so incredibly ruthless, raising his glass to toast the impending destruction of my freedom and my dignity. Spurred by the horrifying conversation I had just overheard, a sudden surge of adrenaline cut straight through my chronic fatigue. As soon as Chloe and Trey left the house to go to a fancy lunch, I crept out of my room and made my way straight to Chloe's home office. I knew she kept all the household files meticulously organized in a locked filing cabinet, but I had seen where she hid the small silver key under a decorative paperweight. My hands were shaking violently as I unlocked the heavy metal drawer. I did not even know exactly what I was looking for until I saw a thick manila folder with my name scrawled across the tab in bright red ink. I pulled it out, spread the papers across her mahogany desk, and the absolute magnitude of her betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was not just a plot to put me in a home. It was a massive, highly calculated financial conspiracy. I found a stack of bank statements proving that Chloe and Trey had been secretly siphoning tens of thousands of dollars from Marcus's private business accounts. They were funneling the cash into a fraudulent shell company registered under Trey's name, bleeding my son dry right under his oblivious nose. But the devastation did not stop there. Beneath those bank statements, I uncovered high-interest loan applications. Chloe had brazenly forged my signature. She had used my personal information to take out a massive, predatory loan against my hard-earned retirement pension. She was stealing the very money I had scraped together over 35 years of teaching, effectively condemning me to absolute poverty in my final years. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning with a violent mixture of terror and absolute rage. I gathered the documents to put them back, but then my eyes landed on the final piece of paper at the very bottom of the folder. It was a preliminary legal petition for adult guardianship. It laid out a series of vicious, fabricated lies about my mental state, claiming I was aggressive, delusional, and completely incapable of managing my own affairs. But it was not Chloe's signature on the bottom line that broke my heart into a million irreparable pieces. It was Marcus's signature. My own son, the boy whose life I had saved with my own flesh and blood, had signed the legal paperwork. He had chosen to believe his wife's poisonous lies over his own mother's care. He had literally signed away my freedom without ever asking me for the truth. I stood there in the quiet office, clutching the document that proved my son was willing to throw me to the wolves just to keep his wife happy. The profound agony of that realization was worse than any physical ailment I had ever endured. I was completely alone, trapped in a house of thieves, and they were already moving in for the final kill. I stood in that pristine office staring at my own son's signature and felt my entire world collapse in on itself. My knees buckled beneath me, and I sank to the thick carpet, clutching those horrifying papers to my chest. My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the pages. A physical ache radiated through my ribs, a deep, suffocating pain of pure betrayal that made it hard to draw a single breath. I had given this boy my literal life force. I had shielded him from every storm, and now he was willingly handing me over to the wolves. For a few agonizing minutes, I just sat there and let the tears fall hot and fast down my face. I wept for the son I thought I had raised. I wept for the mother I tried so desperately to be. But as I traced the loops of Marcus's signature one final time, the crushing weight of grief suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a sudden freezing crystallization of absolute resolve. Marcus was not tricked. He was not a helpless victim in his wife's malicious schemes. He was a grown man who had chosen the path of least resistance. He was entirely complicit through his own pathetic cowardice. He would rather lock away his mother than stand up to the woman he married. I wiped my face and stood up straight, feeling a terrifying, unfamiliar strength surge through my weary bones. I was done crying. I was done making myself small to keep the peace. I carefully placed every single document back into the exact position I found it. I locked the filing cabinet, returned the silver key under the paperweight, and walked out of that room a completely different woman. That very evening, I locked my bedroom door, turned on the television to muffle the sound, and picked up my cell phone. I dialed the only person left in this world I knew I could trust implicitly. I called my brother-in-law, Uncle Jerome. Jerome was Marcus's late father's older brother, a sharp, no-nonsense retired police captain who never minced his words and had an uncanny ability to see right through people. He never fully warmed up to Chloe, always saying she had eyes like a cash register and a heart made of cold brass. I poured my heart out and told him absolutely everything. I told him about the cruel remarks, the isolation, the forged loan applications, and the devastating guardianship petition bearing his own nephew's signature. I half expected him to doubt me, to say Marcus would never do such a terrible thing. But Jerome did not hesitate for a single second. He let out a long, heavy sigh and told me he was coming to get me out of that house right then and there. I told him no. I firmly explained that if I simply packed my bags and left, now Chloe would just destroy the evidence, and I would spend the rest of my life paying off a fraudulent loan while she and Trey completely drained Marcus dry. I told Jerome I needed to fight back legally and permanently. Jerome understood my resolve immediately. The very next morning, while Chloe was out getting her nails done, Jerome drove to the house and picked me up. He did not take me to a doctor or a coffee shop. He drove me straight to the downtown offices of a man named Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis was a ruthless, incredibly aggressive attorney who specialized in elder fraud and high-stakes estate litigation. He was a formidable man in a sharply tailored suit who listened to my entire story with laser-focused intensity. When I finished speaking, he did not offer me empty sympathies or gentle pats on the hand. He offered me a methodical battle plan. He told me that what Chloe and Trey were doing was not just morally bankrupt. It was a barrage of serious federal and state felony offenses. He promised me that by the time we were finished with them, they would be begging for a mercy they would never receive. For the next 3 weeks, I put on the absolute greatest performance of my entire life. I returned to the house and played the part of the weak, confused elderly mother perfectly. I let my shoulders slump forward when I walked. I pretended to lose my train of thought during dinner, purposely confusing days of the week just to watch Chloe shoot a triumphant smirk across the table at Marcus. I let her believe she had completely broken my spirit. I let her think she was winning the war. I would shuffle back to my room quietly, thanking her whenever she handed me a plate of cold leftovers, acting as if I was entirely dependent on her twisted charity. But the moment my bedroom door clicked shut, the frail old woman vanished. Behind the scenes, Mr. Davis and I were working with ruthless efficiency. We legally froze every single one of my personal assets, locking down my bank accounts and securing my retirement pension, so Chloe could not siphon another single dime. Mr. Davis hired a private financial investigator who quietly dug into the shell company Trey had set up. They traced every single dollar Chloe had stolen from Marcus's business accounts directly into Trey's pockets, creating a massive, undeniable paper trail of deliberate embezzlement. We compiled a staggering dossier of their financial crimes, complete with timestamps, forged signatures, and fraudulent wire transfers. I spent hours on the phone with Mr. Davis, meticulously reviewing the legal strategy for the upcoming guardianship hearing. Chloe thought she was walking into a courtroom to casually strip away my rights and throw me into a state facility. She had no idea she was actually walking straight into a meticulously designed steel trap. The night before the court date, she actually had the audacity to come into my room and lay out a drab, oversized sweater for me to wear. She spoke to me in a sickeningly sweet baby voice, telling me that tomorrow we were going to go see a nice judge who would help me find a special place to live, because my mind was getting just too tired. I simply nodded weakly, keeping my eyes cast downward, so she could not see the raging fire burning right behind them. I thanked her for her help. I lay in bed that night listening to her and Marcus laughing down the hall. I did not shed a single tear. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over my entire body. I had sacrificed my health, my youth, and my finances to build my son up, and he had chosen to tear me down. Now I was fully prepared to drop the absolute heaviest hammer of justice on all of them. They wanted to see me in a courtroom, and I was more than ready to oblige. The courtroom was incredibly cold and sterile, entirely devoid of any warmth or humanity. It was the exact kind of place where a life could be casually dismantled and thrown away. I sat at the heavy wooden defense table with Mr. Davis on my right, and Uncle Jerome sitting firmly in the gallery right behind me like a stone pillar of support. Across the aisle, Marcus and Chloe sat with their attorney. Chloe was putting on an absolute masterclass in theatrical manipulation. She wore a modest beige dress and held a crumpled tissue in her hand, frequently dabbing at her dry eyes to feign distress. She looked the picture of a worried, devoted daughter-in-law forced into making a tragic decision. Marcus, on the other hand, looked like a hollow shell of a man. He kept his eyes glued to the polished mahogany table, refusing to look in my direction for even a single second. I stared at the side of his face, searching for the little boy I had sacrificed everything for, but all I saw was a coward hiding behind his wife's skirts. The judge called the hearing to order, and Chloe's lawyer immediately took the floor. He was a slick, fast-talking man who painted a completely devastating and entirely fabricated picture of my life. He told the judge that my physical health had rapidly deteriorated and that my mental state had completely followed suit. He read from a list of carefully constructed lies, detailing imaginary incidents where I supposedly left the stove on, wandered out of the house in the middle of the night, and became aggressively confused when offered help. He described me as a tragic, burdensome woman who was a serious danger to herself and to the young couple graciously trying to house her. He spoke with such convincing sorrow, urging the court that for my own safety, I needed to be immediately placed into the state-run nursing facility they had chosen. Chloe nodded along, wiping away a fake tear, while Marcus just sat there in silence, letting another man assassinate his mother's character right in front of him. They thought they had tied a neat little bow around my life and handed it off to the state. They thought I was just going to sit there and let the dirt fall over my own grave. But they had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them when it was my turn to speak. When the judge asked if my counsel had a response, Mr. Davis calmly stood up and requested that I take the stand. I walked to the witness box with my head held high, completely dropping the frail, confused persona I had been wearing for the past 3 weeks. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, looking directly at the judge when Mr. Davis began questioning me. I did not hesitate or stumble over a single syllable. I spoke with articulate, razor-sharp clarity, detailing my exact daily routine, my independent management of my own medications, and my 35-year career as a high school principal. I answered every single question with the firm, dignified authority of a woman completely in control of her faculties, instantly dismantling the pathetic, incompetent narrative Chloe had tried to build. I could see the exact moment the panic started to set in for the opposing side. The judge's expression shifted from sympathetic concern to deep, serious scrutiny as he looked back and forth between me and Chloe's suddenly pale face. He asked me directly about the incidents mentioned by their lawyer, and I calmly explained that they were complete and total fabrications designed to silence me. Then Mr. Davis brought out the heavy artillery. He approached the bench and handed the judge a massive 4-inch thick binder containing the comprehensive financial dossier we had painstakingly compiled. He did not just defend my sanity, he went on the absolute offensive. He clearly and methodically exposed Chloe and Trey's massive financial crimes right there in open court. He presented the forged high-interest loan documents, showing exactly how Chloe had fraudulently used my personal information and forged my signature to borrow against my hard-earned retirement pension. Then he pulled out the certified bank records and wire transfers, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Chloe and her brother had been systematically embezzling tens of thousands of dollars from Marcus's private business accounts for over a year. He showed the judge the undeniable paper trail leading directly to Trey's fraudulent shell company. The courtroom descended into absolute chaos. The judge's face flushed with righteous anger as he slammed his gavel down, demanding order. He looked at Chloe with absolute, utter disgust. He declared that this was not a guardianship petition, but a malicious, premeditated attempt to strip a perfectly capable innocent woman of her legal rights to cover up severe financial felonies. He immediately dismissed the guardianship petition in its entirety with extreme prejudice. He did not stop there at all. He ordered the court officers to forward the entire financial dossier to the district attorney's office for a full criminal fraud investigation into both Chloe and Trey. Chloe completely broke down in a frantic, hyperventilating panic. She grabbed her lawyer's arm, pleading and sobbing for real this time, realizing her luxurious life was over and she was going to face serious prison time. Marcus was utterly stunned. He sat completely frozen in his chair, his mouth hanging open as the undeniable proof of his wife's massive theft was laid out before him. He realized that the woman he loved had not only tried to destroy his mother, but had been actively bleeding his life savings dry behind his back. His entire perfectly curated world was collapsing, and he had absolutely no one to blame but himself. I watched the sickening realization wash over his face and felt no pity, just the cold, hard satisfaction of absolute justice being served. As the court was formally adjourned and the room began to clear out, Marcus finally found the courage to approach me. He looked completely shattered. He practically stumbled toward the defense table, his eyes wide with shock and his hands trembling. He started stumbling over his words, desperately trying to apologize. He swore up and down that he had no idea about the stolen money or the forged signatures. He begged me to forgive him, pleading with me to come back to the house so we could sort everything out and go back to being a family. He told me he needed his mother now more than ever. I looked at the man standing before me and felt nothing but a profound, heavy emptiness. I calmly told him that he did not want a mother, he wanted a punching bag, and I was officially resigning from the position. I told him I would never step foot inside his house again. Then I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a worn, faded manila envelope. It was not part of the legal defense. It was a purely personal piece of business I needed to finish. I handed the envelope to Marcus right there in the middle of the empty courtroom. He looked confused as he opened the flap and pulled out the thick stack of yellowing medical records from 27 years ago. I watched his eyes scan the top pages. I watched him read the surgical reports, the donor-matching files, and the extensive post-operative complications I had endured. It took him a few agonizing moments to process the medical jargon, but when the realization finally hit him, it hit him like a runaway freight train. The color completely drained from his face, and the papers began to shake violently in his hands. He realized in that exact moment that the mother he had just tried to lock away in a state facility, the mother he had allowed his wife to treat like garbage, was the only reason he was standing there breathing. He realized I did not just raise him, I had literally given him pieces of my own body, my own kidney, so he could survive a childhood illness he barely remembered. He read about the chronic pain, the massive debt, and the permanent physical damage I had secretly carried for decades just to ensure he never felt the burden of guilt. He looked up at me, his face twisted in an expression of absolute soul-crushing horror. The immense weight of his unforgivable betrayal crushed whatever was left of his composure. He collapsed to his knees right there on the hard courtroom floor, sobbing hysterically and clutching the medical records to his chest. He cried out my name, begging for a forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. He wept with a profound, agonizing regret that would haunt him for the rest of his natural life. I did not reach down to comfort him. I did not offer him a single word of absolution. I simply adjusted my coat, linked my arm through Uncle Jerome's, and turned my back on the boy I had saved. I walked out of those heavy courtroom doors, stepping into the bright afternoon sun, leaving my son entirely alone, with the devastating truth of exactly what he had thrown away. It has been 6 months since that day in the courtroom, and the dust has finally settled on the wreckage of my former life. Chloe is currently facing multiple federal and state felony charges for fraud and embezzlement. Her designer clothes and expensive lunches have been replaced by endless meetings with criminal defense attorneys she can barely afford. Marcus is going through an incredibly bitter and publicly humiliating divorce. He was forced to sell that pristine house to cover his mounting legal fees and the massive financial hole his wife left behind. He is living in a cramped apartment completely alone, left with nothing but the deafening silence of his own unforgivable failure as a son. He tries to call me every single Sunday, but I never answer the phone. I have finally moved forward. With the help of Mr. Davis and Uncle Jerome, I secured all of my finances and moved into a beautiful, vibrant 55 and older community, just a few miles down the road from Jerome. My days are now filled with water aerobics book clubs and sitting on my sunlit patio, drinking tea without a single ounce of fear or anxiety. My health is completely stable, and my heart is finally at peace. For the first time in 35 years, I am not sacrificing my own comfort to build a foundation for someone else. I am financially secure, surrounded by genuine friends, and I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of putting myself first. The hardest truth I ever had to accept is that you can give someone the very organs from your body, but you cannot give them a spine. You can sacrifice your entire existence to ensure they walk a smooth path, but you can never force them to walk it with integrity. Never let anyone, not even your own blood, convince you that your sacrifices were worthless or that you are just a burden. Your strength is your ultimate shield. If you have ever had to stand up for yourself against the people you loved most, I want to hear your story. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below, telling me exactly where you are watching from and how long you have been tuned in today. We draw power from each other's resilience. Stay strong, ladies, and never forget your own worth.